Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Sinaltendag, and I am the Senior Manager of Marketing here at Kids & Company. Thank you all so much for joining us today for today's Kidco Talks. We'd like to welcome our very special guest. She is one of a kind. It's Jen Abatiello. She's a certified parent coach and founder of Your Transformed Family. Your Transformed Family guides and supports families around the world to end frustration, guilt, and chaos while finding more peace, calm, and connection to parent with confidence. It's a parenting coaching service that has earned a reputation as a compassionate, non-judgmental, and collaborative approach to empowering parents to achieve the family of their dreams. Today, Jen will be sharing strategies and tips on how to help us parents and caregivers get through those stressful moments with our children, because like I do, we've all been there. So if you have any questions at the end of today's session, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will ensure that they will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. So thank you so much. And Jen, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. I am so excited to be here. I'm always excited to join Kids & Company, and I'm grateful that they welcome me back time and time again. And honestly, I was overwhelmed when Sarah said the number of people who have registered, and I see lots of people still trickling in, but to be mindful and respectful of your time, we are going to get started relatively soon. So I'm just going to share my presentation. And if someone can give me a thumbs up or some way to let me know that you can see it okay.
Yep, we can see it okay, Jen.
And you can hear me okay.
We can hear you. Yep.
Amazing. So first and foremost, thank you for carving out the time to be here today, whether you are here live or whether you're watching this recording. There are so many other things you can be doing and so many other priorities that you have in your life, but you've made this conscious choice to make this a priority and you've shown up. So I want to acknowledge that that alone tells me that being the parent you want to be and your kids deserve is really important to you. And like I said, I was overwhelmed at the interest in this topic that we will touch on rage and anger that comes up in us as parents that maybe we never seen. I will share a bit about my story as well, and we're going to talk about what might be causing it. But I want you just to know that you are not alone, that if you have these feelings, it is normal, but the shame and the guilt often comes up because we don't talk about it. And so I know at the time when I was going through it, I was like, I can't share this. Like, this is awful. And then it built and growed, and I felt like I was alone. And so today we are going to get into it. We're going to get started shortly, but if you would be willing to put in the chat, let us know the ages of your kids or one child, whatever you have, and where you're tuning in from. Because I know we have people from all over, so I'd love to know where you're here from. And again, a reminder that you are an amazing parent just for being here and showing up. There is power in showing up. Love seeing all the places you're showing up for. And I might not be watching the chat throughout because I'm always super focused and trying to be focused on here. But like Sarah said, we are going to look at the questions after. And I also encourage you to look at chat when I ask them questions. Look what other people are saying and responding, because you might see yourself in some of their responses to help not feel so alone in some of these struggles. Let's keep going. So if you've attended one of my talks before, you've probably heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again if you haven't. And if you've heard it before, then this is familiar. Multitasking, though as a society and a culture, we pride ourselves on doing many things at once, especially as parents, science actually tells us that it's actually not more productive. So you've shown up here. I ask if you'd be willing, and I know many of you, depending where you're at, you might be at the office, you might be, there's distractions. Would you be willing to silence as much as possible those distractions by closing tabs, maybe putting do not disturb on your phone, closing your door, maybe if you're in a shared space in an office, putting on your earbuds. I'm going to share for 45 minutes. I've crammed a lot in of high value content, and I promise you if you're committed and present, you will walk away feeling like you can make a difference, not only in your life, but in the life of your family. So just as a reminder, the Q&A we are going to save to the end, but if a question does come up, I encourage you to put it in the chat right away, because I know sometimes when a question comes up for me and I'm holding it, I'm like not fully present with whatever else is going on. So put it in the chat, get it out of your mind, and continue to be present with us as we go through here. So we are talking about calm and confident parenting. We are going to dig into understanding and overcoming parental rage. And I'm going to tell you in just a minute why I'm here in front of you today. I love seeing everywhere: Halifax, Vancouver, Burlington, Toronto, all over. So some of you might be familiar with me from other Kids & Co talks, but if you're not, I am a Master Certified Parent Coach. I'm also certified in nonviolent communications and emotion-focused family therapy. But probably most importantly, I am also the mother and hands-on experience raising a 10-year-old highly sensitive neurodiverse child, as well as an 8-year-old strong-willed boy. So I have 2 boys who are 8 and 10. And I share these labels, though I don't love labels, to give you a quick sense of the dynamics that I'm dealing with in my home. So not only have I learned skills for myself and in my home, but that's also led me to help other parents, hundreds of other parents, break cycles of anger, frustration, and guilt, to learn to parent with more calm, confidence, and ease. I myself, I'm a recovering perfectionist and dominant parent. I don't come here from like being one of those calm Buddha women who's always present and loved being with kids. No, I came from my own struggles. I used to have a juggling, demanding executive job, raising these 2 young boys, learning to find more calm and connection, all while breaking my own generational parenting patterns. It's through overcoming my own struggles and COVID that made me realize that I wanted to do something with more purpose and meaning. And so I left behind a 20+ year successful career to help other parents just like you. So what are we going to cover today? You're going to leave understanding the difference between rage and anger. And it's really important to understand the difference, and I'll explain why in a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the common triggers. You may relate to some, you may not relate to others, but the point is to create some awareness and thinking about what the message of your trigger might be. Then we're going to talk about 5 tips to manage and reduce the intensity of those emotions. And finally, you'll be able to get access to a bonus of how to repair and reconnect. One thought I want to start off with is, we are not meant to be perfect. I, as a recovering perfectionist, definitely had this idea that I needed to be perfect in order to feel good enough, in order to feel worthy. But we only need to be good 70% of the time in our parenting. The other 30%, what's most important is how we repair. And that's why I'll share with you how to do a repair without blaming, shaming, to help our kids make sense of those times where we might lose our cool. So what I'm going to teach you today is just the means, but ultimately it's up to you when you take it and practice it and live it, that allows you to change the trajectory of the course that you're on with yourself and your family. Your journey to get there starts now. So thank you for coming along this journey with me. My mission here today is to support you as busy moms and dads to realize that you can turn things around by focusing on 5 things to help reduce the intensity of your own big emotions. And you're not alone. Look at all the people here who are facing similar challenges. And I've helped and supported many who are facing these challenges as well. So let's dig in and do this. Anger versus rage. Let's start with anger. Anger, how many of you think this is negative? Or how many of you have grown up seeing either in your parents or other people in your life when they're angry, either be aggressive or violent? But anger in and of itself is actually a neutral emotion. It is no better or no worse than happiness or sadness or disappointment. The problem becomes when we witness people who are feeling angry behave in negative ways, we start to associate it as negative. Anger is a valid emotion. It's how we express it. Yes. What else? Anger is an important signal. Their body, something is out of balance. Oftentimes, we are wired and we are born needing connection and wired for safety. And so if we perceive our threat to our lives, our physical, emotional integrity, we need to notice that and think about what we're needing. But oftentimes we've grown up ignoring it and stuffing it down. And a lot of times there's something underneath the anger. And that's what we'll talk about, some of the feelings that might be living underneath the anger, like sadness, maybe anxious, maybe overwhelmed. And so those feelings might leave us like our child is threatening for us in some ways when we see their behavior. And that might sound shocking, but we'll talk about why that might be. Remembering that anger is a cue that something is out of balance. What happens when we ignore the anger and we keep stuffing down or going through, especially if as a child, you repressed anger and focus on being nice, overachieving, hyper-responsible, then the rage might come out in parenting as you relive your own childhood. Now, this is not the only reason rage comes up, but it is often one when we witness our children. It's like holding up a mirror to the things that maybe we weren't allowed to do, and we learned we're not safe, and we see in our kids, it sends us into this fight or flight response. See, our body is this beautiful thing. Our nervous system is wired to protect us. If we perceive, based on the stories we hold on to, that our child's behavior is not okay or threatening, and we've never learned to deal with the anger, it builds. See, our symptoms in adulthood are often things that were adaptive in our childhood. So we learn, especially between birth and the age of 3, is this safe? Is this dangerous? Is this life-threatening? Our nervous system, the unconscious, this is not a conscious thing. It's our nervous system is like a database looking back in our history and making a decision in a millisecond, even nanoseconds, on, is this safe? Is this dangerous? Is this life-threatening? Let me give you a little bit of my story to help, at least maybe some of it might not resonate with you because I hit really rock bottom. I became a mother later in life. I grew up with an emotional and physical abuse, and so I did not think I could be a mother. I focused on what I perceived I could control in my career. I was living and traveling the world. And, it's when I met my now husband and I had done a lot of work myself that he's like, I know you've done so much work. You can be the parent you want to be. I didn't even think I could get pregnant. I had thyroid cancer in my 20s. And I also was PCOS, which leads to decreased fertility. So I was like, you know what, this is probably not gonna happen. Then I got pregnant. And so I went into my default, subconsciously not realizing, into control mode. I got to get ready. I read every single parenting book. I was doing prenatal yoga. I was taking all the vitamins that my naturopath recommended. I had a birth plan, a doula. I had lulled myself into this false sense of control that I didn't even realize at the time was my coping mechanism to feel safe. Control, perfectionism, high achieving, all of these things made me feel safe, made me feel worthy, made me feel good enough. Then my son was born, mother was born, and I was overwhelmed by my own expectations. See, I had set up this idea that a good mother, if you're a father here, same idea, is like, what are these stories? See, when we're preparing to bring a child into the home, we subconsciously have these, and maybe consciously, these movies of what our life will be like. And I had the image of a self-sacrificing mother who was stuck and not being able to change. I had to always put my child first. And so I read this book that led me to believe that if I was attuned to my child, if I read their cues, that they would never cry. Crazy, right? And so here I was, a new mother, colicky baby. I was like, but I read that I'm not attuning to my child. I'm not meeting their needs. They're always crying. I am failing. And so it started with grief that this is not what I imagined. I imagined this beautiful connection with my child, being able to nurse him and getting to sleep and co-sleeping, all those things that I like, this is what I'm going to do while I'm on mat leave. None of it was going according to plan. And I felt grief that I didn't know how to express. And as the grief built and was left unspoken, unattended to, I isolated, it turned to rage. And I took that rage and anger initially out on my husband. He was at work all day. I was at home alone with this crying baby that no one come to help me. I had this idea that my mother-in-law who lived closer, would come and help me, but she came and sat on the couch and wanted me to make coffee. I was like, what the hell? Like, I need to shower. I need someone to hold this crying baby so I have a minute. But I did not know how to ask for help because in my mind, I grew up being uber dependent on taking care of myself because I did not have parents who were emotionally able to help me. And so I learned to be fiercely independent, but that didn't serve me when I was trying to raise a child. And I see how this is extremely relatable. Yeah. And so, yeah, get me in the chat. Have you ever felt yourself screaming at your child, vowing not to do it again? But then it would happen again and again. Please, please look at the chat and see how many people have this same feeling. You are not alone. And maybe the thoughts were, how dare you? Maybe as they get older, it's not the baby. You're not respecting me. You cannot talk back. This is not appropriate. And in public, woo! I would hide that rage for sure. I remember leaving the park and it's like, how is every other child leaving so nicely? Although now I look at it with a different lens. And my child, I have to bring out kicking and screaming, trying to grit my teeth, not show how angry I am. Like, don't embarrass me. This is a sign that you might be experiencing parental rage and to have some self-compassion. Because when we feel like we've lost complete control of ourselves, we don't even recognize ourselves. Shame is when we keep it quiet and we don't talk about it. And that's what we'll talk about, some of the tools on how to support ourselves. There's an overwhelming sense of anger and frustration. Your body goes into a state of panic and you feel like you cannot stop yourself. And typically, it's triggered by something smaller and insignificant. And think about this scenario, if you can relate to sometimes you're able to be patient and present, especially I imagine many of you, work inside and outside of the home, whatever the situation is. If you're trying to get your kid out the door in the morning for school or daycare and they're dawdling and you feel this sense of pressure that I need to get you out, I need to get back for a 9 o'clock meeting, I need to do this, I need to do that, them dawdling might you might lose it. Notice if maybe on a Saturday morning where you don't have any activities and your child is dawdling and you're just trying to get out to go to the park, maybe their dawdling won't be so impactful. And so notice those times the child is not behaving any differently, but the situation and your response to it is really different. So let's dig more into some of these triggers. And maybe if you'd be willing, and I know some of you are already putting you that in there, share in the chat, what are some of the things that trigger you to help other people notice that that triggers me too. Oh yeah, I get that. Again, with the intention of feeling seen, heard, and not alone in these struggles. Lying, yeah, I'm gonna talk about this. So the first trigger, and I talked a bit about this with mine, is sadness. Feeling like this parenting thing is not going at all the way you imagined and this idea that you had of what it would look like. Maybe you're comparing yourself to other parents who seem to have it all together, God, I have this love-hate with social media. I don't show up on it very often because I also see the impact that it has. And sometimes you will like, I just need to disconnect and distract, and you scroll. But notice if scrolling and seeing these beautiful pictures and things of other people make you feel shitty, remembering that that is their highlight reel, not the behind the scenes. And you have no idea what happened just before that beautiful family photo or right after. We often judge ourselves based on how well our child has behaved. This is one of the key challenges in parenting, is that we perceive their behavior as a reflection of us, but they are their own individual. And one thing I want you to remember is all behavior, theirs, ours, everyone, humanity, is communication. And so think about this sadness and showing it some light. Because when we don't give it some light and attention, it builds. And so what sadness could be triggering too? Maybe there's grief. Like I said, the parenting's not going the way you wanted. I had, like, before being a mother, I used to run marathons. I would go for runs for a few hours. I would meet my friends for brunch. I would, go to bed and wake up when I wanted. And all of a sudden, I lost that. And there's guilt in saying that you miss it, but two things could be true. You could miss that and you love your child, right? So think about what sadness and giving yourself permission to feel it and talk about it in a safe space, because I've also made the mistake of sharing vulnerably in a space that was not safe, and the shame grew. What else could be causing it? Frustration. If we repress healthy and self-protective aggression, it comes out eventually. And oftentimes we're acting out of two beliefs. One, I'm responsible how other people feel. This idea of their feelings, I control them. Or two, I must never disappoint anyone. Modern parents today, especially since the pandemic, there's so many more balls up in the air. Yet society hasn't changed to allow for that. If you think about, today, what we're carrying, especially in the pandemic, where, you maybe didn't have any external supports. Maybe you're working outside and inside the home. Maybe you're caring for elderly parents. There's a lot more going on today. And we talk about this village. Where's the village? Very few of us have the village that they used to have, where it was a community supporting and raising our kids. If we never get a break, there's also that sheer exhaustion, physically, mentally, emotionally. We pile on so much and we set the expectations so high that when we don't meet it, we fall hard. There's also, we carry so much of the extra loads, like the dentist appointment, the doctor's appointment, extracurriculars we need to sign them up for. I think now, like, it's spring here in Ontario, and I was like, oh shit, my 10-year-old doesn't have a spring jacket that fits him. Looking at all the clothes, all those things. And if we don't give ourselves permission that I can't do it all, lowering expectations or outsourcing what we can, it falls apart. I used to worry on, meal times. I had picky eater. I was like, oh, I'm not eating enough vegetables, I'm not eating enough this. Bedtime battle. And all you want them to do is go to bed so you can have a minute for yourself, right? A lot of times it's us, we're needing the rest. And so we're pushing them through when really it's like, oh, I need it. Acknowledging it's like, oh, I need some rest. Doesn't mean, this is the difference, is doesn't mean you may be like, Jen, oh yeah, great. Like I can't get rest out of these young kids. What rest looks like and how we take care of ourselves, depending on the age of your kids, is gonna look different. And I'll talk about still the power of naming what we're feeling and needing, even if we're not able to get that need met the way we want right now, is cathartic. Another trigger is maybe conflict. Are you parenting with someone whose perception of discipline is different than your own? We all have a need to feel seen and heard. And so if you're not feeling seen and heard in some of your relationships, this builds and can be really frustrating. Maybe you're putting on this facade of, I'm the nice person, I always go along, I'm always trying to please. And maybe your partner is the opposite, where it's a bit abrasive, but yet neither are supportive of what's going on for us so that we can model for our kids. Over time, whatever patterns we develop are wired into our nervous system, and they are the unconscious ones. And so in order to change them, we need to bring them to the light and make sense of them. There was an example, I love the work of Gabor Mate. I just finished his book, The Myth of Normal, and he interviewed, there were these two twin boys. I'll try and tell this story quickly because I'm mindful of time. They were raised by an alcoholic father. You may have heard this story, but one of them grew up to be an alcoholic like his father. The other one grew up to be really successful, didn't have addictions. And when they were interviewed and asked the question, the alcoholic was like, how come you became an alcoholic? I watched my father. The other one was asked the same question, answered, I watched my father. And this is the power of repair, because one of them made sense of what he witnessed in his father in order to break the cycle. And the other one went on autopilot and didn't make sense then and repeated the pattern. And so rage happens usually for two main reasons. You dismiss the early cues of your needs going unmet, right? Like maybe you stay up, like basic physiological needs, even for our kids, sleep and food, right? I always say I get hangry, and so does my little one. So sometimes it would be like, oh my God, I went through the whole day and I didn't eat. I came home and I was starving. And then my kids, came at me and wanted my attention and I exploded. I needed some food. So it's noticing, we'll talk about a strategy on how to start noticing those needs going up. And the other one is what I talked a lot about, even myself, is that inner child perceives whatever's going on with your child as life-threatening. And we go into the survival state of fight or flight in some cases, but this talk is more about the fight response. And so how do we start breaking the cycle? So when a pot of water, or in this case, kettle of water, is boiling, you want to start noticing, in the pot where the little bubbles are starting to form before they're like all bubbles and overspilling. You want to start learning those early cues to be able to turn down the heat before the pot boils over. And this is the challenge, and being able to create that connection between what's going on inside of me before I react. And Basil is an amazing example of this. He was stressed beyond belief. He would go to bed at the end of the day with his hands in his head, saying, why are my kids hell bent on making my life a living hell? Both he and his wife had really successful careers. He was an entrepreneur, doing really well in the height of pandemic. His wife is a professor at one of the top universities in Canada. Their kids at daycare were amazing, all this feedback. And at home, he would lose it and go into a state of rage when his daughter wouldn't listen to go up for bath. And it was after just one call, he was able to remove those blinders and understand that for him, that little child, where he was very much rewarded on when he was good and achieved and wasn't allowed to talk back, that all came back to him when he witnessed his child who was not listening or talking back. And is when he learned to decode that message and see what he was needing and was able to put on his oxygen mask, that he was able to not only restore the relationship with his daughters and his wife, but they were thriving. And so how do we keep the pot from boiling over? This is a quote from Roller May with, our freedom, we want freedom, is we have the control to be able to pause between the stimulus, which might be your child's behavior, and your response to it. But this is the practice. And this is where we aim for 70%, not 100%, because we are human. And so let's dig into the 5 things to support yourself. And some of these are in the moment, and some of these are out of the moment. It's kind of like, I'm going to butcher this analogy of, NBA basketball, because I don't really follow it, but you think, and I'm not even going to name an athlete because I'll name the wrong one, but do you think a basketball athlete superstar goes to the NBA for their all-star game and has never practiced shooting that 3-pointer? No, they would mess up. They've practiced it 300,000, 400,000 of times. And so a lot of times being able to change that stimulus to response and pause is a lot of things we do to support ourselves out of the moment. But this bullshit stuff of self-care, it's necessary, right? It's not going to the spa, it's not going to the manicure. All those things are beautiful. That is not going to make the difference in those moments. It's some of these small things that we do in practices to support ourselves. So the first thing is the keeping a log for awareness. And this might be in this picture, like a journal, writing it down. You might not love the writing, although there is benefit in connecting with actual physical writing. To be able to reduce the intensity, start with noticing when it comes up. What are those patterns, right? Some of you talked about when your child lies and this and that, like what is it? So that we can start connecting the dots on what's going on for me. Sure, some of the behaviors like lying we don't want to see, but lying usually happens for one of two reasons. They either lie because they want to avoid punishment, or they lie because they don't want to disappoint you and they're geared to please. And so we need to understand and go beneath that. But to do that, we have to go beneath in our own so that we can do it for our kids. The patterns get wired in us in the early years from birth to 3. And so yes, oftentimes I work with parents and they'd be like, I don't remember how my parents dealt with my tantrums. Yeah, consciously you don't. And this is where I love the book When the Body Says No, also by Gabor Mate. It's our body remembers. And that's where your triggers are the messages of maybe how it was dealt with, what you were allowed to do, what you were not allowed to do. So pause and write them down to bring them to the conscious, because we cannot change what is put our blinders on. We can only change what we bring to our awareness. Some of the questions to think about asking is, why am I feeling this way? And notice this is all within us. What within me feels fear and lack around my child? How is this moment with my child reminding me of something from my past? And that answer you might not definitively consciously know, but the other questions give you clues. Why is this powerful? Figuring out what need is being met and the story we're holding on to helps us get in touch with ourselves. And science shows, this is the work of Daniel Siegel, if we name our feeling and we're able to reframe it, it reduces the intensity. So when we talk about rage is basically anger that's boiled over. If we're able to notice the anger before it boils over, we're able to reduce that intensity. We all are born inherently wanting to connect. We're born for safety. We're born for connection. We want to belong. What does connection mean? It means to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued just as we are, not based on our performance and things we do. But the more stressed we are, the shakier our emotional architecture of our child will be as well. And that is not to place guilt. That is for awareness of change with our child starts with change within us. Number 2, name it to tame it and creating awareness around where you're being triggered. Number 2 is a grounding exercise. And this you can practice actually with your kid as well, but you can also do it with yourself, not just in the moment, but these are out of the moment. It's kind of like meditation, which some people might, when I say meditation, be like, oh no, that's not for me. And maybe this is not for you either, but I'm sharing ones that either for myself or the clients that I work with have been helpful. And so this technique, we're going to talk about it. When the trigger is coming on, it helps us get back to the here and now. And if you're someone who experiences a lot of anxiety, I'm going to make it really simplistic, so don't trash me in the chat that's more complex with this, but in the simplistic form, it's fear of the future and the unknown. And so if we're able to ground to the here and now, it helps. So this grounding exercise, you may be familiar with it or not, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I won't do it here with you now because I'm mindful of the time. But the idea behind it, and clients who do it with their kids, sometimes do just 3, 2, 1. I'm curious if someone has done this. It brings you here and now, right? When you think about 5 things you can see, hear, smell, touch, you're bringing to the present moment. And that signals to our nervous system that might be going into this fight or flight, like this is dangerous or life-threatening, that no, we're okay. Like we are safe. There is no lion. We want to let our body know that there is no lion. Strategy number 3 is positive self-talk. And this alone won't do it with you. Like this, no toxic positivity. You need to still go beneath the surface because just the reframing of the talk could feel superficial. But if you're able to do some of the other exercises to understand and make sense of the triggers, it makes a positive self-talk more powerful. So some that I love is remembering that this is hard and you can do hard things. That's a Brene Brown one. One of my favorite is reframing when you see your child having a hard time or behaving in a way that's triggering for you is, my child is having a hard time, not giving me a hard time. Because oftentimes we take it personal, and that's when we go into this fight or flight or rage because we think it's a personal attack, but it is not. I'm not saying it doesn't feel that way, but it is not. And number 4 is finding support. And this is where, like I said, it's important to find support where you feel safe, where you're not feeling like you're going to be judged, but being able to confide in someone where you feel seen and heard without judgment is powerful to reduce the intensity of those big emotions. Again, you want to find someone who's not going to, and this was my default, when someone would share a problem with me, I wanted to fix it because I didn't want to see them struggle. And the same with their kids, right? When they come to a problem, like my kid, when we moved to a new neighborhood and they started a new school, and he'd be like, oh, no one played with me. Like I was alone at recess. Our default might be like, what, nobody? Like, why didn't you go and blah, blah, like go find someone to play with or do this or that? But the power is really in sitting and seeing that, oh, you must have been sad sitting there at recess by yourself. Doesn't mean we don't help to support after, but being able to be seen and think about yourself when you're venting about your day and someone's just trying to solve it and you're like, whoa, at least for me, I'm like, I just want to be able to share. I just want someone to tell me, yeah, I get it. That makes sense. And it might not make sense to you. So you're like, I don't get it. But you can say, I believe you. I believe that's really hard. I believe that made you really sad. Because then we're tuning to the inside and we learn to trust ourselves. Because ultimately that's the most important thing, is trusting ourselves, not waiting for all these cues and signals from the outside. And number 5 is the regular check-ins, right? Because this is when, the pot boiling to be able to turn on the heat, you want to check in regularly. And I love the app by Mark Brackett. He wrote a book, Permission to Feel, and he has an app that's available on Apple and Android, I believe. It's called How We Feel. And it's similar to, like I always talk about these grok cards, which is feelings and needs. If you don't have the emotional vocabulary, which I did not know how to name my feelings. Like if I was in a conflict with my husband, I would shut down. Like with him, it was, I would either rage or shut down. And so I feel like that's a general guy thing. Well, like I'm more male, where I was like, no, I'm shutting down. And so this regular check-in, and the app kind of gives you red, yellow, green, blue, and there's feeling words to be able to say, which one is it? And I want you to notice, if you do that either with the app or there's other ways to do it, notice when you're just able to name, again, that power of name it to tame it, what it is. But you want to do that. The book Atomic Habits, to be able to build habits, you want to kind of attach it to something you're already doing to increase the likelihood that you will do it. It's kind of like, you put out your workout clothes, your running shoes the night before, so that you're less likely to make excuse the next day. One thing that clients attach this too often, it might be, just before you get in the shower, you check in with how you're feeling. Just before you go pick up the kids at daycare or at school, you might check in with yourself to be able to shift. Maybe just before going to bed, you check in. But building in this habit of being able, yes, how we feel to do that helps lower the temperature on our feelings and helps us attune. This is the idea. If you've flown recently again, is putting your own oxygen mask on first, because you are useless to anyone else if you're not supporting yourself first. And so let's jump to the future, right? You've taken all those things and you practice them. Change is possible. Parental rage, yes, is challenging, but you can take control back by putting your oxygen mask on first. We cannot give our child what we do not give ourselves. Remembering that anger is a healthy and important emotion, but if we learned how to respond to anger in a negative way, we might have these negative associations. Our brain is mostly concerned with not keeping us happy, but keeping us safe. Being open to learning about yourself so that you can develop these emotional regulation skills to be able to teach your kids. The most powerful way to know if you develop a skill is to be able to teach it. Because otherwise we pass on to our offspring what we haven't resolved within ourselves. These triggers are messages. Remembering that 80% of our actions are subconscious. So as a child, if you weren't allowed to safely express your thoughts, feelings growing up, if your emotional needs were not met, not because they were awful parents, but they were doing the best they could, witnessing them in your child can be triggering. If we're able to attune non-stressed, emotional, reliable caregivers, we're able to develop a strong sense of security and trust in the world and build healthy relationships. We all have this need for closeness, but we arrive in the world expecting attachment, not just like we're expecting oxygen for our lungs. This need doesn't go away when your kids are out of diapers. It continues to motivate us throughout our life. And so what have I covered? The difference between anger and rage, noticing that anger, there's underlying emotions. And if we don't learn to recognize it, then it boils over. Parental rage and what can trigger it. We talked a lot about the ideas of the sadness, the frustration, being able to manage conflict. Which one of those might be going on for you, or is there something else that needs to uncover? And then we talked about 5 ways to start reducing and practicing reducing those overwhelming emotions. So far, does this all make sense? Like, give me a yes in the chat if this is making sense, if it's resonating. Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Do you have more understanding of where your rage might be coming from? Do some of the stories that I share with you like, oh, yeah, that might be me too. Do you see how practicing some of these tools can maybe help lower the intensity? How can your spouse get on the same page? We're gonna get to the questions later, but it starts, and this is the work that I do a lot with when one parent comes to me, it starts with them. It starts with them making this shift. And sometimes, oftentimes, the parent's gonna see that shift. And right, when someone is told, if you tell someone you can't do it like that, they're less responsive. So one of the modules in my cycle intensive course is empowered conversation. And this is actually really powerful with spouses and partners, not just with kids, on how to have this conversation that you want to make a change. But it starts with, and our kids only need one parent to be securely attached with. So you start making those shifts in you. They might notice it, they might get curious, but then it's having this empowered conversation with them to bring them alongside you. Most importantly, when we fall short of our expectations, and I say, would you be willing to practice? And I haven't shared the repair and reconnect. I noticed I was cramming too much in here. So you will get it if you're interested as a bonus after today's call. I'll share with you the link on how to get that repair and reconnect, because that models for our kids that they can make a mistake and they're still lovable because they see us modeling that. Because many of us, our parents never apologize. I don't know one person whose parents apologize generally without saying, well, you made me yell because you did that. And so the repair and reconnect is meant like the alcoholic father to help the child make sense of that experience. So change is possible. And I'll give you a few examples of clients. Like Beth came to me after working together. She felt more supportive and compassionate. She left with tools to be able to support her kids with their big emotions. Mayez and her husband were living in Toronto, expats, family in France. They had no support locally. They were busy working parents. Working together, she felt calmer and more confident. She learned to empathize and validate her kids' feelings. And most importantly, she learned to let go of the guilt and reduce her rage to feel calmer and more confident. Samantha, after just one call, she was able to apply the tools we talked about in a short call to reduce her toddler's tantrum and also to be able to control her reactions to it. And we talked about Basil, how he reduced his stress levels significantly and his relationship and family thrived. This is what's waiting for you today. And you can do this work through email support that I provide. You do not have to work with me privately. And you'll also receive a bonus of 6 steps to repair. And so I'll put the screen up here. If you want to do this work and get the support right in your inbox to follow along, I've replicated as best as possible as the private work that I do one-on-one with my clients. You can grab your phone now, even though I asked you to put it away, to use this QR code, or I know Sarah is gonna send these links after. If you go to yourtransformedfamily.com/start, you will get in your inbox right away today the 6 steps to repair. You'll uncover why maybe your high achiever perfectionist qualities are inadvertently making parenting harder. You'll learn to stop viewing your child's behavior as a failure of yourself and understand why they might be misbehaving. And you'll finally learn tools to deal with those situations with confidence. So I encourage you to go there. And the other opportunity you have is being here, using your Kidco 23, you save $20 on my April 13th workshop I'm doing in partnership with Jen Marshall. So there's going to be breath work involved, which is so powerful. Stress impairs our ability to be calm, responsive, and attuned. And so in this workshop, you're going to learn more tools from me, as well as tools from Jen on the power of using our breath. So if you go to yourtransformedfamily.com/workshop, you can use the promo code KIDCO23 to save $20. This is April 13th, virtually from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern times. All these links will be shared by Sarah if you've missed it here, or if you're listening to the recording. And now I want to jump into questions. Cool. Sarah, if you want to come on and help me out with the questions.
Yeah. Sorry, Jen, my clicker wasn't clicking. So yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Jen. This was super informative and I think so relatable to so many of us in so many ways. So yes, we will be taking questions from the audience. So far, what has happened is that some people said that the app in Android, I think it was How We Feel, it wasn't coming up for them. So that was something that maybe, I don't know if it's the same title. If not, maybe, can you just kind of confirm that that's the title and that's.
It is. And I know I had a client who used it on Android, but I'll double check and I can send it to you after because I won't look on my phone now, but I know what
no problem.
And I have it, and I've had people do it with Android, but it's possible. And if not, I will send an alternative that you can include in the follow-up email that would work for Android.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so I feel like we should kind of like go back. And there was one question from Cheryl and she said, how to get your spouse on the same page. So I think we should start there.
Yeah, and I talked to this really quickly, but I'll go different, to go over it again. It's one, first and foremost, remembering that your child only needs one parent to be parenting this way in order to grow up resilient, confident, successful, and all those amazing things. So I want you to know, it doesn't mean you don't want your spouse or co-parent to parent this way, but know the work starts with just one, and that might be you. And as I mentioned before, like I have many clients who oftentimes it's the mother that starts this work, and then the husband notices it and starts coming alongside. And if they don't, there's an empowered conversation framework that you can use to have this conversation to bring more awareness to the surface, right? Like I talked about in the triggers, a lot of times dads, and I know I saw some comments where it's like, they grew up and there's this belief that boys don't cry, boys don't show their emotions, like there's still that ingrained subconsciously. And so when they see their kids, they might have a harder time dealing with those big emotions because they've continually subconsciously received the message that those are not okay. And so it's helping them understand and the willingness to be open to thinking about it a different way. And one book that I find a lot of parents share with their co-parent is The Whole-Brained Child. Oftentimes, and I'm stereotyping here, dads like the science behind it. And my program is definitely rooted in brain science, nervous system, and all that. And it's pulled together from so much research. But one book by Daniel Siegel, The Whole-Brained Child, is a book that if the co-parent or the parent that you're trying to get alongside you would be willing to read, it sometimes creates an openness to perceive things differently.
Okay, so now another one, thanks, Jen. And I actually read that book. It's amazing. So I highly recommend it to everyone as well, too. There's another question, and it's about basically she's a working mom and she has a great partner and family for support, but she still feels like she doesn't have any time to be present to do the five things, the exercise or time for self-care. So are there any tips for trying to stop with intention when you're feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, so that's where it's one, like starting to notice where your body, when we talk about being able to change the stimulus to response, it's starting to attune to where does your body send you the first signal? Because our body is a first one that's starting to raise those yellow flags that we ignore. So it's starting to notice even what does calm feel like? And it's as we start to notice those cues that we can hit pause. So simple strategies in the moment to be able to hit pause when you're like, I don't have time for this outside self-care. In those moments, when you notice you're building, 99% of the time, it's not an emergency. Unless your child is running into traffic or is like trying to juggle knives, it's not an emergency. And so we can say, whoo, I gotta say, a lot going on here. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm just gonna go in the washroom and I might go splash cold water on my face. I might take a drink of cold water. So it's noticing it for us that we can move. And another, I just did an interview on a podcast about music. How many of you like music? But I find music is really emotive and helps us either to go into the feeling. Like if I want to shed tears, most of you are Canadian, like I listen to Sarah McLachlan and the tears will flow. But if I want to move from feeling angry or frustrated, like I might play pop music or something, and it's noticing, listening to the music and moving and dancing. I always think of like, I don't know how many of you watched Grey's Anatomy, but like when Meredith and I can't remember her name, they used to do like dance it out at the end of the day. So your routine as a stressed mom trying to carry this, maybe the transition when you're feeling that way is putting on a favorite song, and it's not for your kids, and it's not necessarily them picking it, but it's you doing it and noticing how they react when you do it. My kids do this coming home from school often. They'll play music and they'll dance and move, and that allows them to shift those emotions. So those are just 2 ways. Hopefully some of those resonate with you. But there's small ways that we can take care of ourselves. It doesn't require going away for a weekend.
Yeah, absolutely, Jen. We listened to Despacito with Justin Bieber. It really gets everybody up and moving in our house, and we're all just dancing away. So that's a really good thing. 100%. Now we have another question. This is a really good one. If you're in the midst of a tantrum, how do you dial down on your frustration when you can't go away and take a moment? There's nobody else there to help you.
Yeah. And so again, you want to, in those moments, you want to get low and slow with your child. I imagine, and I'm picturing, and tell me if it's a different picture, like this child maybe having this really hard time on the floor. Like I had my child when he was like about 4 or 5 years old, like he would tear apart our living room. Like he'd be throwing all the cushions off like the couch. He would be in this state. And I would literally sit on the floor. Sounds ridiculous. And I'm like, focus on my breathing, right? I'm like, you're safe. I love you. Take a deep breath. And sometimes if we'll go on for a while, because initially when this work is new, it takes time for them to start tuning to your new way. It takes a while for them to get out of it. And so sometimes I would feel like I need a break. So I'd be like, you know what? You're safe. I'm just going to the other room for a minute. I need to take a few deep breaths. I would leave the room for a minute and I would come back. But sometimes if my child is in his room, if they're younger, I would carry him to his room. He might be kicking and screaming, but there's a difference between angrily carrying your child to the room, if you're able to, right? As they get older, you're not able to physically, but looking at the age, some of you can. I would physically bring him to his room, close the door. I would sit against the back of the door and he'd be yelling and screaming. And I was the calm in the storm, right? And so in those moments, I was kind of trying to feel like I'm a duck with the water washing off my back. And I focused on me. I was focusing on me and remembering that he can attune to me as those feelings are being released. You're not teaching in those moments. You're going to do a very few talking because they flip their lid. They're not rational. We talk too much. And so it's sometimes fewer. I love you. I can see you're having a hard time. I'm here. That's it. It's when the storm is over that we kind of want to go back and problem solve and help them make sense of like, you must have been really angry. And even those words, if you have a highly, a strong-willed child, they might not like hearing those words because like, do not tell me how I'm feeling. And so you have to find different language. And that's how I work with clients, is to really make it specific to your child and what's working, what's not working. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah, it was really good. At least it has a nice coping strategy that, we can walk away with, because I feel like a lot of people are unaware of being able to just pull back, including myself. So Jen, another one is, any advice when anxiety in a child can benefit from external support? So my daughter recently became obsessed with going potty training. For example, waking up 18 times a night to go to the washroom. Oh, we've been there. She's 3.5 and she has been potty trained for over a year. So this is seemingly out of nowhere. So, they're not sure if it's anxiety or how do we, what do they do to say help or what is it? Because, they're definitely experiencing rage as a result of this.
Yeah, I get that, right? If they're waking up multiple times through the night, you're feeling tired, you're feeling frustrated. There's maybe like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, is there something wrong? So it's noticing those fears that come up with us. And in moments of calm, like maybe throughout their day, it's probing, like, help me understand what's going on for you. And they might not be able to give you an answer. Then yes, talk to your pediatrician, making sure there's no underlying problem going on. When I have some clients who's, it's not constant pain, but their child struggles with constipation. And constipation, yes, there's a factor of diet and things like that, but it's also, some kids get constipated because it's their way of, I have control over this. I don't feel safe releasing. And there is a bit of that emotional piece of, I need to feel safe to release. And so, yes, always rule out if you know your child best, right? I'm not going to tell you whether something's wrong with them, but if something is kind of making you feel afraid, ask the questions and then talk to your pediatrician.
Another one is food. So our biggest trigger for yelling is when our 3-year-old, who's a picky eater, throws food or their drink because it's not the food that they want to eat. So what advice can you give?
So a couple things. One, I highly encourage you to think about, how do you set yourself up for success? And so in our family, we're a big believer and my kids grew up, full transparency, in Montessori, and they do this a lot where the kids are involved. So either involved in helping prep the meal in basic ways, involved, the safe foods. And so you want to get them involved as much as possible because that increases their likelihood of wanting to eat it, because they have this sense of pride of like, I helped, put those carrots on the plate, whatever it is. And family style meals are also really helpful. If you notice a child is throwing food or something on the table, again, look at the behavior and what's it communicating? Is she all done? And that moment she doesn't know how to say it. Then you want to say, okay, sweetie, it seems like you're all done. Like, I noticed you throwing the food. Does that mean you're all done? And it's like, then we might take it away saying, I think you're all done. Maybe we can try again another time. Instead of like our instinct is like, don't do that in the angry, but then we're not understanding what might be going on. So we want to really decode, is it because they're all done and they don't know how to communicate it and they need our consistent boundary of, like, I can't let you throw the food. If you're throwing the food, that means you're all done and we'll try again later.
Okay. Now, I think this one has popped up actually quite a few times over as I'm looking through the chat and the Q&A, siblings and fighting with siblings. So I have one person has 4-year-old twin boys. And when they fight, I get very triggered and I can't take it out to calm, and they can't calm down. So because, they're going to hurt themselves, those types of things. So how do they approach this problem without yelling?
Yeah, so this workshop is not all the parenting tools. It's more about putting our oxygen mask on. We have lots of other workshops on that throughout the year, but for sure, I'll touch on this briefly. Safety is always a #1 priority. So if kids are fighting and physically harming each other, again, one thing I like to say is like, whoa, a lot going on here, no judgment on this and that, but you want to physically separate them. And depending how old they are, it might be one sitting on one end of the couch and one sitting on the other, and you're in the middle. And then you want to be able to help them regulate, because this thing about regulation that we so desire for our kids to have, they are predominantly in their middle brain. And I want you to understand that middle brain is feelings brain. The impulse control, the rational thought, problem solving, all that is in the higher prefrontal cortex, only starts coming online at age 7 and isn't fully developed till mid to late 20s. And it is only developed to its full potential through the practice of co-regulation. And co-regulation means they need our help to deal with their big feelings. So even as a 10-year-old, and sometimes even as a teenager, and even think about yourself, sometimes when you're having a hard time, what a hug feels like. And that's where our role as parents is, one, to figure out our calming tool, but then it's to help them figure out theirs. But for a long time, theirs is going to be us. We are the regulation tool.
Now, this one is a really tricky one because I feel like we all experience this at one point or another. But my child doesn't want me to acknowledge that she is sad or hurt and throws a big tantrum when I'm trying to acknowledge her feelings. This is a trigger for me. Any suggestions for this?
Yeah. Yeah, and I have one of those kids. I have one of those kids when I say, oh, you must be feeling angry, oh, it would make it worse. And so I stopped naming it in that way, be like, oh, I can see you're struggling with something. You may even say, I meant, like, is it, like, instead of saying you must be, is it this or is it that? To kind of make them have some ownership, because one of our key needs is autonomy. And so if a child, and it sounds like a potentially a strong-willed child, feels like they're being told how they feel, they're like, hell no, you're not going to tell me how I feel. And so changing the language, or choosing in that moment to just say, I see something's bothering you, I believe you, focusing on regulating, and then talking about the feelings, but not saying you must be feeling this or that. It might be like, I'm curious. Were you feeling frustrated because of blah, 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 and help them understand why you think that based on what you witnessed and what you noticed.
Okay, Jen, we have time for one more question here. And it's it's from Lauren, who has a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. So a trigger for myself and my husband is when the 2-year-old is trying to help the baby and gets rough, or keeps taking his toys, and she does not listen when we try to physically separate them, but then she has a meltdown. Any suggestions to help her understand safety play with the baby?
Yeah. And so it's tricky a lot of times when we bring a new baby into the home, and this is part of my siblings workshop where we talk about how to set yourself up for success to introduce a baby. Our kids, remember, as you and I, we're wired for survival. And if they view that, you know, our love and our availability and our attention is limited, and this child is stealing that away, they might get aggressive. And so we want to ensure that we're carving out that special time with each one. But also, if you notice that they're having a hard time being gentle, it might be something that you practice out of the moment, like with a stuffy or with a dog. Like I see my dog like on the couch, but it's like you practice, like, how do we stroke? And you might not even say the baby, but how do we stroke the stuffy nice and gently? Let's practice that. And then when you see them with the baby, it's like, can we practice that soft stroking? And then if they can't, then you might say, like, I see you're having a hard time doing that right now. So like, let's go over here and try again. But being mindful of our outer voice becomes their inner voice. And this, like, you're not going to ever be perfect. They're going to say things again that you're like, oh, how did that impact them? And we're all going to make mistakes, right? I always say we're all messing up our kids to some degree. And it's like, we want to reduce how bad it is. But I don't want to put this pressure that you can't say this, or you can't say that. And so in those moments, you practice out of the moments, that gentle stroking. And in the moment, if they're struggling, that's signaling that they're having a hard time doing it. Not because they're bad, because in that moment, they're still really little too. And this impulse control of gentle is hard.
Absolutely. So Jen, we have to wrap up, sadly, even though we don't want to, because has been an amazing webinar. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, just, you know, sharing these strategies and tips for our parents and how to help ourselves just get through those stressful moments with our kids. So we do really appreciate everything that you always do for us. And what you have to offer. So we would like to remind all participants that we'll be following up with a recording of today's session and any other materials Jen will share with us. So we have a short survey at the end of this webinar. If you can please fill it out, it always helps us, you know, move ahead with our other Kidco talks, and provide your feedback. It's always more than welcome. So thanks again, Jen. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you at the next Kidco talks. Take care.
Sarah. It's been a pleasure. Have a great one.
Thanks, Jen. Bye.
Bye.